Casey Toohill, Noah Togiai, Brett Toth, Josh Blackwell. No, I'm not just listing former Eagles just randomly. What do these four guys have in common? These were all Philadelphia Eagles players who came in, had solid camps at one point in time, and were claimed by other organizations during the roster cutbacks. And that's a significant statement to make, guys, because remember, it's not so much that you're claiming a guy to put him on your practice squad. No. When you make that waiver wire claimer, you are now placing that individual on your 53-man roster, meaning someone else that you had a look at in camp ain't making it. So, without further ado, guys, I want to talk about some potential guys that, if they are exposed to the waiver wire, it could potentially go the wrong way for the Philadelphia Eagles. This is a stacked football team. We cannot lose sight of that. There are other teams that are not in the situation the Eagles are. They are a bottom third of the league roster, and they're probably going to be looking at these top thirds, the 49ers, the Eagles, organizations like that have stacked rosters. I would even put the Cowboys in there. They have a stacked roster this year. They're going to be looking at these organizations and seeing, okay, what can we take away from these teams? All right, y'all, let's get it. What's up, Cerebral Football fans? My name is Steven Hyder. This is Gate City Sports Channel. As I stated, guys, look, it is rare for dues to be claimed, but there is a track record of this happening with the Eagles. We do know that this has been an organization that's really good at building rosters. We're really good at constructing it. And sometimes, we lose guys. It's just the fact of the matter. We've gotten lucky and had guys like Noah Togiai end up making their way back. Brett Toth made his way back. But with that said, we've had guys that, like Josh Blackwell, undrafted free agent out of Duke last year, played nickel cornerback for us, that we didn't get him back. To be fair, Chicago was thank you, we'll take him. We've had those kind of things. Casey Toohill, 7th round draft pick. Casey Toohill was a guy out of Stanford that showed us a little bit of pass rush ability, was a bit of a raw athlete, but we could see this guy is going to be good down the road. He'd be a good back of the roster type player. We thought we could get him through those waivers and get him onto the practice squad and develop him, and Washington was like, no, we'll put him on our 53. So we do have to be careful. The first name I'll give you of a player that I think we have to be very, very careful about putting out there to waivers is Julian Good-Jones. A guy that I didn't think I'd say this about before camp started. So, outside of Sua Peta, I will say that Julian Good-Jones is a guy that you have to be careful about. This is a guy, Iowa State, connections to other coaching staffs, guys that coach with the Colts. That's where the connections come from with Nick Sirianni and Iowa State. This is a guy that has guard center versatility. He's a young man that may have value to other teams. I could see the Eagles, if they expose him to the waiver wires, expecting to get him back on the practice squad, which I think is a reasonable expectation for the Eagles, but then you just get a team that's on the back end. It's hey man, any person the Eagles kind of coveted and in other years would have put on their roster but couldn't do it because of space this year, yeah, we're going to claim that guy. We're going to claim that guy. We know how they feel about him. We're going to see what's there with this guy. So he's a guy that I'm paying attention to. Defensively, I'm a little weary about what's going on in the interior defensive line and at the edge positions, right? Guys, unless they trade Derek Barnett, he's going to be on this roster. I don't know how else to say that. It's kind of obvious at this point. Unless there's some kind of trade worked in there, I would be shocked if he's not on the roster. Well, that puts a guy like Patrick Johnson in limbo. Patrick Johnson's been in the league for a few years. Another guy was 6th, 7th round pick. He was a late round pick. But he developed into a quality back of the roster type player. These aren't star players, but these are solid, fundamental guys that can do the job for you, right? Patrick Johnson is quite good versus the run. Really good core special teams player. A guy that was developing as a pass rusher. I don't think he was quite there yet, but he was showing you, some marks of improvement. We heard the reports come out of camp early on, hey man, Patrick Johnson kind of developed a little bit of pass rush here. He's a guy that I worry about. You keep a guy like Derek Barnett, you could get in a situation where you're playing roster tango, and you can't keep a guy like Patrick Johnson because you can't just say, oh, special teams. Well, now you got Nolan Smith, who's also a guy who's a pretty good run defender, even though he's a little underweight. He's a solid run defender for that type of body frame. A really good pass rusher. He's going to be a rotational player for you. And by the way, he's a guy that can play some core special teams for you. I'm worried about what might happen with Patrick Johnson. I do hope the Eagles find a way of either keeping 6 defensive ends or through the roster tango, they find a way of keeping the rights over a guy like Patrick Johnson somehow. The other guy, interior defensive line. Look, you got a logjam here with Marlon Tuipulotu, Kentavious Street, and Moro Ojomo. Moro Ojomo was a 7th round pick out of Texas who I called pretty much the steal of the draft. I think this guy can play. This young man is a player. He's got great length and reach for a guy that's under 300 pounds, right? He's like got 34.5-inch arm reach. You can see that wingspan, that big, lengthy, over 80-inch wingspan play down on that interior defensive line. Even though he's not 300 pounds, look at the preseason, look what he did to those lines, guys. And I know we can say the majority of those dudes are not on NFL rosters, Steve. To be fair, you're right. But we saw, for similar levels of competition that we would expect him to be at, he was dominating these dudes. I mean, he was a force in the run game down there. He's a guy that I would love to stick around this roster for the long term for the Eagles. But you got to logjam and you got to figure out what you're going to do here. Now, you have a vested veteran in a guy like Kentavious Street that maybe you could do some stuff with, right? Maybe you can make a backroom deal with him. Maybe you can do some things that help you protect a guy like Moro Ojomo. And I do hope that they find a way, because I'm telling you right now, there's a lot of... This is just from fan bases. I don't know anyone in the front offices, guys, but a lot of fan bases are very well aware of who Moro Ojomo is. You don't believe me? My highest viewed video I've ever made on this channel is about Moro Ojomo, which is over 60,000 views. Fan bases know who this guy is. They know this dude could be a pretty good player in the league. I'm going to assume if the fan bases know it, the front office freaking know it too. So he's a guy that I definitely worry about, to be quite honest. Another guy that worries me a little bit here is when you get into the secondary and you look at these corner positions. We have an embarrassment of riches in terms of back of the roster type players here. Guys that could potentially develop into actual future pieces. Eli Ricks maybe didn't have the camp that people thought he was going to have, right? Maybe in practice it didn't show up the same way as they were hoping and expecting. But when lights came on in the games, I mean, he did show out, and he's a really good football player. It's a guy that could potentially be a piece for you down the road. You know that Josh Job's making this team. I mean, Josh Job in practice, we were told, has been really good, and in the games he was pretty dang good. The other guy I'm going to say here is that look at Mario Goodrich, man. You know, Josh Jobe and Mario Goodrich came in last year as the undrafted free agents. Both of these dudes can play football. The Eagles have done a heck of a job in 2 consecutive seasons of identifying, multiple defensive backs who can play in the NFL. Let's keep in mind what I said earlier on in the video about Josh Blackwell, who was also an undrafted free agent from 2022, who the Eagles brought in, who ended up being claimed by the Chicago Bears and stuck on their roster. So, I mean, we have done a really, really solid job of analyzing that position group. And it doesn't change this season. Mekhi Garner, really solid special teams core player. Guy that can give you those core special teams reps. This is a dude that's big, physical, will fight you at the line of scrimmage. He's got boundary corner written all over him in the league. I don't know about the footwork, guys, and familiarity. I'd have to see how he would adapt to something like playing as a nickel. He's a big guy. Could probably be a big size kind of nickel corner for you, but I don't know what his experience is there, guys, and you can't just assume that you can plug an outside corner inside. It doesn't always work, guys. The footwork and what goes on in terms of the traffic, it's way different playing inside than outside. So we can't just assume that with these dudes. With that said, Eagles got an embarrassment of riches here. I'm pretty sure they would love to maintain all these guys some way, but you can't. How many of these guys are you going to keep? Every dude that you keep is another guy you can't keep somewhere else. How many defensive backs are you going to keep? Who are you comfortable, exposing to waivers? I've heard people say, will you expose this player to waiver? No clear. Let me remind you, Josh Blackwell did not clear waivers last year. Ordinarily, you're right. You can expose a lot of these dudes to waivers, and generally speaking, in a given year, they're normally going to pass. But I do think you're taking a risk when you're as talented as the Eagles are on the back of the roster with some of these guys, to where teams that are not as talented, I think there's a shot that you might lose a guy or two if you're not careful. Now, this is the closest statements out here. Do I think the Eagles are going to lose 5, 6 players? No, come on, man. No. They might lose 1, 2, 3 guys. 1 to 3 guys might end up getting picked up and get claimed, right? I don't think any of these dudes are locks to be claimed by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just saying that if you don't play your cards right, other organizations know what's out there on tape. Other organizations know about these guys. They scouted them too. Other organizations are probably looking at this and saying, we don't love what we have in camp right now. We don't love what we just came out of camp with. You know what? That Eagles team is stacked, and they're going to have to get rid of some guys that can actually play this game. I'm curious, guys. I'm really curious how they play the roster tango over the next 24 hours. Leave your comments down below. Now, what I will say is know the vested veterans, right? Like Kentavious Street's a vested veteran. Nicholas Morrow is a vested veteran, right? Guys with 4 or more years of accrued playing time are vested veterans. Those dudes are the guys that do not go through waiver wire, so you could cut them and work out a backroom deal with them to tell them, don't leave town. You're still going to be a part of this organization. We just need to do some roster tango here. We need to get other guys on that initial 53 to then do something with them to preserve their rights. Those are the guys you have to watch out for, guys. Who are the vested veterans, and then who are the guys who aren't vested, who if you do cut them will be exposed to the waiver wire, Who concerns you guys? Who are those guys that are not vested, who will go through the waiver wire if they're cut, that concern you? All right, y'all. I appreciate y'all's time and attention. I'll see y'all in the next video.